You are listening to the Fresh Take Network.
What it is, what to do, welcome to Fresh Take, Josh, with Adam Lamb Arbuthnot with the one and only Richina Foggo.
Hey Josh, what's up? Thanks for having me.
It's been a long time coming. We've been back and forth trying to set this up. In some ways, it's like my most highly anticipated interview.
Oh, honored. Thank you. Thank you. I know I always watch and feel like that'd be cool.
Yeah. So, you and I go back a long time. You kind of note that you played with my sister Churchhill.
Yes.
So let's we'll kind of go in a few other spots because you obviously got a lot going for you. Really cool story with Richina that aren't familiar with her athletic career. It spans a lot of ways, and there's some other cool outlets that you got going on that we'll talk about. But let's kind of go back to since we're going to focus a little bit on the basketball side first, but there's so much more dimensions to Richina as an athlete. She is a 5-tool star athlete. When we're done the pod, you'll kind of find all that with Richina. Let's kind of start with the basketball side of things. What was your first memory of like really loving basketball?
I would say I fell in love with basketball last season when I came to SAIT.
Yeah.
I felt like growing up, I played because my dad coached, and that was fun. But I didn't put the fun and competitive piece together until recently. And I think so much of that is because I came back with a different outlook and a gratitude that I just feel is so different coming back to sport after being out of or feeling like sport career was over. So fun for me, probably the last season that I played.
Well, you could tell Jay and I would often give you like the Draymond Green comparison just because of the hustle, right? Like, and you were like a shorter forward, but you were taking on the teams like for that SAIT team in particular, there wasn't like a traditional 5 all the time on the floor. And sometimes you would take the 5 or the 4 duties and you were out rebounding and out hustling a lot of the girls out there.
Yeah. Well, when I was younger, I was like 5'8", the height I am now when I was grade 6.
Yeah.
So I got used to playing kind of in that position. And then high school obviously wasn't the tallest anymore, and especially through club. But yeah, I do feel like so much of that is just because of like intensity or aggression, feeling like, all right, I'm up for it.
You could definitely tell that. I mean, and I think, from the SAIT season, there's that iconic photo of you jumping 5 feet in the air from a game-winning shot.
Yes, that was awesome. When I remember Lauren hit the 3 to tie us.
Yeah.
Then Nir came down and hit the 2 to win. So fun.
Fantastic. And we'll get back into some SAIT memories in a bit because I know there's a big time story of what brought you back to SAIT. Talking about Churchhill, so you played for the Churchhill Bulldogs, and it's funny as I've done these interviews from the last little bit talking to other U Sport coaches and ACAC coaches, this is still a team that gets talked about by people in the women's basketball community to this day. Obviously, your coach at SAIT was one of the assistant coaches there. Just a stacked class at that time, right? You had the number 1 ranked point guard in the city at that time with Katie Arbuthnot. You had Alex Cole, who was the number 1 ranked center. Alex and you still really close friends to this day. And Jordan was on that team. Just an absolutely loaded roster at that Churchhill team.
Well, yeah, and I think all but 2 girls went on to play post-secondary, whether it was volleyball, basketball, track.
Right, Lindsay at volleyball was a first-star recruit.
Robin Whitaker, I don't know if you remember her. She played rugby. Yeah, it was crazy. It was like, I remember feeling like this isn't high school ball at all. This is something different. And all of us were so competitive. It was weird because we kind of knew, not in an arrogant way, but we knew the other teams weren't the competition. There's 1 or 2. It was between us, like who's getting the starting 5. It was good. And our coaches, like you said, Coach Beer was out there. I remember running suicides and just like, who's going to win? Stakes were always high.
It was, and I mean, unfortunately, you guys don't win at all because of an unfortunate, ref call that happened in one of the games we won't get into, but it's still, every game watching that, I think a pinnacle of it was the Coral Child Classic, which again, I get a lot of people talking to me about, and just like getting the chance to actually see it on videotape that just got converted to a DVD, that crowd in there, it was crazier than some college courses. I think that was you guys versus, I believe, who was it? Western? It was you versus Western, I believe, right?
Yeah, Western or Scarlet?
Right. Scarlet, or whoever Nicole Clark played for. So it was the back and forth there, and that gym that day was insane.
Yeah, you look back and it's, when you ask me about fun, I feel like for me, what is fun is like super competitive. And I think what I overlooked back then, because of the level of skill, was it didn't always feel that gritty competitive against other teams. So it was fun to win. But now when I think about fun, it's like, where's the grit? Where's the intensity?
Yeah. So, and like I said, that team was one of the star-studded. You had two, I think in the city, you guys had the top the top five, two of the top recruits that went there. You still stayed friends with Alex. She went to the UFC, and then you would follow her for track there. And you were doing track stuff still at Churchhill as well, right? So you were doing both sports, right?
Yeah. My basketball experience is funny, like small pond, big fish. Then I got to Churchill because I went to private school for most of my life. I got to Churchill and just saw more competition. And I realized, like, okay, basketball is cool, but to take it to the next level, like, what do I want to do here? And that's actually when I started participating in track. I'd ran mainly just in high school, but it was my grade 12 year that I started, I joined a club and then started taking it competitively. Had some great coaches that reached out to me and sort of showed me the way. So yeah, I think that caliber of athleticism showed me that if there's going to be a next level, you either get on and put in find another gear, or we switch gears a bit.
And what was good? Did you, because obviously like, we're going to get into your track stuff at UFC, but when did you kind of make the decision of like, basketball is really fun, but I have more, was it a more passion thing for track, or I see more of a future with the track at that point, at least?
It was that summer, my grade 12 year, competitions just started going really well. And track is one of those things that, especially when you first start out, the stimulus, you improve, right? So when you're just running and practicing faster, I mean, with any sport, but really with track, I think it's most people's story that as soon as they start training, they see results quick. And it was sort of the other coaches showing me, like, these are what track times mean. These are what you can qualify for. And it was through that last year going into my first year of university that I really decided, okay, let's commit to this.
And so when you ended high school, did you get basketball offers at all?
Yeah, so I was considering Mount Royal, Red Deer were kind of my two.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, UC.
They came in.
Yeah, they came through.
And then you were just like, you know what, let's try this track thing.
Yes, and I was also really attracted to the program at that time. The club coach that I was running with also coached athletes like Sam Effa, Amon Nelson. She had a really solid group of sprinters that had Olympic national potential. And my eyes were so big, like training with them, being around them. And then once I got more in the mix and started to see other people's success, I was like, okay, if they're doing it, I want to do it. So it was kind of through just exposure, really.
It's so interesting too, the way you're talking about track, because I hadn't really been involved in that world. And then I called the championships at SAIT and got to see one of the best SAIT athletes I've seen with Matthew Trevelini just dominate that sport, and getting to have that conversation with them about the
Yeah.
stuff. And I wasn't even sure how I would call it at first, but getting to watch them and watch the spirit, it's a lot of the things you were kind of talking about with the athletes, and a very good, even against, there's obviously the rivalry. And I think you kind of just saw this in the Olympics. There's a lot of respect between your other competitors in it, which I hadn't seen really in any other sport.
Yeah, it's funny because most athletes, I would say, Kate, this is the thing you got to understand about track is it's all you, right? So what you don't see in the Olympics is like the warm-up process. You see some of it when they show you like the warm-up track. And that is so, like, no one says anything. You are warming up in this energy field of just people like psyching themselves up. And so then you come onto the line and you're giving it all you got, and exactly, the race is done and everyone high fives. And I think that just comes from this appreciation that, like, I know what you've been through. I know what you're grinding out there. I know what you're trying to do. It's like an understanding. While an individual sport, there's still appreciation for each other's efforts,
Yeah, you could tell that just being around that world. So you tracked there for 3 years, and it's almost impossible to find your results online, unfortunately, as hard as I tried.
Probably way back.
So kind of just was, I'm sure there was ups and downs with your time there with track.
Of course. So there was an adjustment for me because outdoor I ran the 100, 200 meter sprint.
Yeah.
Indoor, you either run the 60 meter or the 300. And there's a different style relay. So it's a 200 meter relay, whereas outdoor is 100. So the 60 meter was my thing, like, loved it. Basically every race I was getting personal best times. And then the 300 was a huge learning curve because it's so much speed endurance and mental. And it was just that much longer for me than a 200. So I was kind of trying to figure out where exactly. It's hard because you can be like a powerhouse sprinter, but then the 300 doesn't necessarily show that. So yeah, my first year I had a lot of success. I loved it. I then got this crazy hamstring injury that I swear today I still have in some ways. Like, sprinter's nightmare is the hamstring. And eventually I switched coaches to a coach that was actually a pole vault coach, but had a handful of sprinters and did a ton of sprint work with his group. And he incorporated more plyometric work, and that really, really benefited me. And with him, I started to get back to my old times, which were much more competitive. And again, with that came more success.
So what is track? Can you have 5 years in it, or is it 3 years?
No, it's 5. A lot of people, it's a little bit different in that, like, with basketball, you're either in school season or you're not. With track, you can still compete during the school year as a club member. So I used my 3 years of eligibility as a dyno, but continue to run as a club member, so it didn't interfere. So I was still running and doing meets and competing, just not using my eligibility. And a lot of times what people do is use that indoor season to prepare for the outdoor season, because the outdoor season is when you can get national meets, national funding, Olympic years come around, and obviously those are the races that you're going to compete in. So yeah.
So the Olympic side of things, you said you had been around some trainers and stuff that had some Olympic time. How close did you get to that situation for yourself?
So there's provincial level, national level, Olympic, and Olympic developing. I was always in the national side of it. Like, my times were always, bubbling on the on that. So what's cool though is you're still training with your Olympic crew, the crew is going to take it to the next level. But yeah.
And I, you and I had this conversation too, just with, the Olympics that we just had, of, supporting the athletes at the right time of the morning. And I think that was a key thing too, of just, if you're watching these Olympics, everyone's like, oh, I'm watching it, but it's like, are you really watching it? You got to
Are you
watch it
watching
early
it?
in the morning.
If your alarm is not set for 3:30 a.m. to watch the sprints, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
You did not watch it. Don't tell me you're waiting till 8 a.m. when you already know the results. Yeah, I was hard on some people.
No, and you should be. And being in that world, was there anyone that you've been around or trained around that you had seen gone to that Olympic level?
So the Canadian crew, there's two men and then Crystal Manuel, the women on the women's side. I didn't train with them because they're all from Toronto. They're in the East, but they're my age group. So at national meets, I would see them. Yeah, but the distance crew, even Damian Warner, I would always watch compete. But it's funny, like you look at the age that comes up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, these girls are young, or this crew is younger, like I
Seems like
forget.
that, right? Like you're kind of at the retirement age, because
Yeah,
like
I
Usain
know.
Bolt's around your age now, right? And he's just
Yes,
done.
I
Yeah.
know when they talk about the older athletes, I'm like, well, I mean, really what it is I feel like track is one of those things that, like any sport, is so the wear and tear. But with track, like there's not a day that you're not running full speed. So I don't think it's a young sport. I think it's actually who is staying healthy enough, long enough. Because really, like the way your body matures, the way your mind matures, if I could insert all of this into my 18-year-old self now, like that's what I felt the whole time watching the Olympics is
Yeah.
where do we end up with that?
And an injury can just take everything away. I can't remember the one it was, but there was a race with DeGrasse, and there was a Nigerian that was supposed to be,
Yeah.
heavy, and you could see his quad blew, and you just felt, obviously you're rooting for DeGrasse as a Canadian. We're just like, oh, this poor guy, and he gutted it out, but you're like, he's done. That's it. If it's Olympics, maybe his career. It's terrible.
Well, and Josh, to think of, it's also crazy because it's not like these people don't have access to the resources to take care of themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at it and I'm like, wow, think of, that's actually probably the fastest he's ever ran for that to happen, right? Like his whole coaching staff and staff around him are there to prepare him for that moment. For that to happen is like, how fast is he really going?
It's crazy. So what kind of made you kind of say like, okay, I'm really happy with my track career, obviously, but it's time to move on?
I started working at a strength and conditioning facility, and I had sort of been on this buffer. Like I had this hamstring injury that had reached its peak, and the strength and conditioning coach there was like, I can help you. And he helped me rehab my hamstring and just my overall mechanics. And I was super excited to try to dabble. I shouldn't say dabble. I was gung-ho about getting back into track. I was like, I'm going to make this crazy comeback. And I ran 2 meets and they went well. But I just felt like mentally, I didn't feel there.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled because I felt like this new sport anxiety, this performance anxiety that I worked a long time to sort of get over that hump. And with that working there, it also opened the door for career for me. So it was one of those things of like, okay, I feel like I have to sacrifice career a little bit to get back into something that I'm not totally sure about. But career-wise, it started to kick off and I was like, you know what, let me just come out on a bang. I'm healthy. I don't have that feeling of what if, because I have gone and done a few meets. I was feeling like I'm ready. And it was pretty natural for me to just realize it was maybe time.
It's interesting too. You talk about the sports anxiety inside, and something that we just saw in the Olympics with Simone Biles, right? And it's something I think a lot of people on the outside. I mean, it was funny. It's like, oh, I've never seen so many grown men have an opinion about gymnastics all of a sudden, right? But just
Totally.
being an athlete, there is a side of that, that is the mental part that people don't really talk about or focus on enough. I think you saw with Simone there of the side, and someone like you're running track all this time, and then you get an injury like the hamstring injury, and it's something that's going to run through your mind every single race.
Totally. People don't understand that part. For me, confidence comes with feeling prepared.
Yeah.
And preparation includes mental prep. And, I have to admit, like when I heard Simone backed out, I was like, oh, selfishly like wanting to see her
Yeah, of course.
destroy everyone. I'm like, come on, can't you just like, whatever it is. But putting myself in that position, like, I think that's what people also don't see is there's an opportunity to be, when you talk about this conversation of who's the real GOAT, here's your chance to just solidify it. And it's still not enough for her to continue moving forward. That should then shed light on enough, conversation's over.
Yeah. Yeah, the opinions in that and everything, and you and I kind of talked about before, and just the focus on women's athletics, it always seems like there's 1 foot forward and 1 step back with stuff. And I think we just saw with the women's soccer, right? This did 5 million for airing 6 at 5 in the morning on the West Coast, and then on the other side. It's like, and it's all anyone really talked about this week, and whenever the women's hockey is. But it's just like, my thing was too, it's it's whether it's like with you running or playing basketball or with Simone, it's like, can we keep that energy all year round though?
All year. And who's gonna like push that forward, right? Who's going to actually take, because why is everyone only invested when, like you said, there's so many men with all these opinions, and this isn't exclusively a dig on men. It's just like, why is the conversation there when the crisis is there, but not, there's no momentum through it all? And recognizing that maybe women's sport has the rep it has because of patterns like this with the ups and downs.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely seen it from the evolution of women's basketball from when you played till now, right?
Totally.
It's been an entirely different side. With your track stuff, when you did go to SAIT, and we'll get into that in a second, was there ever, and this is kind of my arrogance to the track and field world, so forgive me, but was there any offer to do cross country? And I'm sure it's a different format, but I was wondering if they ever, with your track experience, like, hey, do you want to try cross country at all?
I did a mini podcast with Brody and one of the other track athletes. He's cross country.
Yeah.
And he was like, why don't you come out? And I honestly had I hadn't even thought about it. But cross country is like,
mentally.
No offense to them. Mentally, you got to be a little verging on the side of out there to run yourself like that. It would take, I don't even know what it would take. Probably not is my answer.
Yeah. And so, you spend all this time away from basketball, a decade plus, and it was, something that brought you back into the game. Not, it's a very, obviously an emotional situation that brought you back in, but something that brought you back in.
Yeah, my aunt passed away. She battled breast cancer and it metastasized to her brain. And she passed away. And I just had this feeling of like, I was in my own hustle bustle of life, and I just opened my own small strength and conditioning company and was working crazy. And I felt like I missed some crucial time with her. And when she passed, because it happened so fast, I felt like, oh my gosh, what I would do to have been there more if I understood the situation better. And it like shook me, it rocked me. And I remember there was 4 days where I've never felt that type of low and anxiety. Like, honestly, when they say people, you don't get out of bed, like I just laid there and I just felt like, what do I want for the rest of my life? What is missing? Like, if my life was to end like that, there was just so much reflection. And what was missing for me was like fun and an outlet and something to really make myself proud. And I sort of recognized that is the way I'm working now sustainable? And that's when I started looking at programs at SAIT. And I had told myself I will never go back to school, ever, ever. And school, the option of school felt sort of comforting for me. And that's how I knew, okay. And with that, there was a few classes that I didn't take in high school that I knew would be a challenge for me. And in order for me to get into the program that I was applying for, I had to do basically summer school on Saturdays. And because I was willing to do that, which again, my reference point was like, I'll never go back. There's no way I'm taking chemistry. I was so willing to do it all, knowing that it could lead me towards something. And that's when I reached out to Coach Beer and was like, are you still around? Are you still coaching the women's team? I actually said to me, I'm like, do you remember me? That was my first email to him. Like, and he wrote back and said, are you crazy? Of course I remember you. And I said, so what's it gonna take? And he's like, well, what do you got? And I was like, I have no clue. And that's sort of how the ball started rolling. And I remember feeling like excited, like feeling like very nervous, but excited at the opportunity of the new challenge. And that was some comfort for me through the grief in all of it.
And I'm really sorry again for your loss and everything on that, but it was awesome to see you on the court. I remember my sister was the one that broke the news to me and said,
Really?
hey, yeah, she was super excited for you.
Uh,
Just being like, hey, Rashina's going to be at SAIT this year. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So that was, for me, it was like, because I've been able to see some women that had the connection to my sister in the past, like a Devin Kendall, Katie Beard,
yeah.
that played there. But it was like, oh, this is someone like I do remember from Churchhill days that get to see there.
Totally.
And
Close.
like
Katie and I were close in high school.
yeah. And I mean, she was close to a few people now. She's not there anymore. Maybe does Alex have a year of eligibility? Maybe get Alex back for one more. I think she has 1 year eligibility. Does she not?
I don't know. No, because I remember her 5th year because I went on
Oh,
court with
right.
her.
I know she
Yeah.
had some injury stuff. So,
I know. Yes. Yes, she got a
but
knee.
it was just super exciting to see you back in the courts. And like I said at the beginning, like you added this, this women's team came in, it was a younger team, and you definitely took on the veteran leadership role to the team. And I would say it's like some of the wins they got, you could tell you came at the bench and like, all right, F this. I'm helping us win this game.
Yeah. I feel like that happened pretty organically. That certainly was not, I don't intention. I didn't go out being like, I'm going to be the leader. I think I can't even explain to you how nervous I was to do this.
Yeah.
Every tryout, honestly, every practice for the first 3 months, I was like sick to my stomach, thinking like, what excuse can I give to Coach Beer today of why I can't come? Like I was nervous, and I knew the only thing I could rely on was, like we talked about earlier, that preparation piece. And I mean, track, you have to understand that you literally look at your most important meet and you write a program that scales all the way back. And that's exactly what I did. I was like, okay, tryout days here. I have basically 6 months from when I made that decision. And I made a program for myself because I knew, like, athletically, condition wise, I could handle that side of it. I knew the track background would really benefit me that
Yeah,
way.
no one outworked you. We can say that safely. No one outworked you.
I mean, I had the feeling of like, honestly, I was going to play with like WNBA girls. That's how I looked at it.
It's the way you should.
And I think naturally over time, like, we had some performance testing, which again was very familiar for me with track, because at the beginning of every season, we had a series of testing to see where everyone was at. And it was pretty similar to what we had done. So I was like, okay, I'm training for that. And once I kind of set myself apart that way, each practice would be timed to run our horrible suicides. I'd make sure to win those. And I think my leadership just sort of developed, like I said, organically that way. Once I understood kind of my role, I was then definitely more vocal But I like to think that I led by example.
You could
And
tell. You could tell.
yeah,
Even if you were on the bench at times, you could tell the vocalization you had towards the girls.
yeah, absolutely. I just and then you sit into that role, right?
Yeah.
You learn to love it, and you appreciate being that person for others. And I also felt, Josh, like, okay, if you're gonna do this at 30 years old, you better, like, don't be the old lady. Like, that was my
Again, you had these similar ideas that I did, right? Of because I went there in the broadcast program. I stepped away from it. The age thing was in the back of my mind because I would have been a 29-year-old
yeah,
player at that point. But it was also being in the broadcast side. I had to decide if I wanted to go with that schedule or not. And you just do realize there's another side of conditioning because you're going against some 18-year-olds, right? And you're the 29, 30-year-old running against them. Well, you have the veteranship in the mind now. You still have the older
you
body.
still have, yeah. And I used to roll my eyes so hard when people would be like, when you're older, your body's not the same. I'd be like, yeah. Let me tell you, there'd be games where I'm like, am I even warm yet? Like, we would be halftime and I'm like,
Yeah.
my Achilles are gonna snap. Like, that part was crazy. And then the next day, getting ready for the second game. So part of it was just faking it a little bit, like,
Yeah.
yeah, good. But
And so then the pandemic hit,
mhm,
which has made you have an extra 18 months of waiting until your eligibility, and it's been
totally.
just a weird time for recruiting, right? Because you had girls that would have came in last year, and now you have
Absolutely.
girls that are coming in this year. So it's entire, and so you don't even really know who the competition really is coming up because everyone is so different now.
I know. I know. I was saying, our a few weeks ago we had a tournament
Yeah,
style where we just scrimmaged basically. And there was a few girls that were up and coming, or girls that I actually recognized from other schools that were coming out to play with SAIT. And that was my first sort of showcase, all of ours, of who could potentially be around, who was showing interest. Some of our girls are still out of town. I know some girls haven't decided. I know there's conversation about people not wanting to use their eligibility of their last year if the season's going to be shorter. So it is kind of this weird, but I just keep telling myself everyone's kind of in the mix.
yeah.
Everyone's going through this. It'll be
And
what it'll be.
and you've put the grind out, just judging by your Instagram and everything like that. And, not to put too much criticism on your game, but I think if anyone did a criticism of your game, is like, she can grind, shot needs a little bit of improvement. And you can tell from the Instagram, you have put in the work on your shot.
Someone asked me the other day how many shots. Okay, so when COVID happened that summer,
Yeah.
I was like, I probably am shooting 1,000 times a day.
Yeah.
And now that we've had it exactly like you said, 18 months and been able to get back in the gym, I don't even know. Like, and finally, it's starting to feel more fluid.
Yeah,
Um,
you can tell it just for the Instagram. And obviously you said like your pops is a coach and a former player. So he's going to know the workouts that go through
He's
as
been
well.
phenomenal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just, even the skill side of it, the ball handling and what that does for your confidence. Like
Mhm.
last year, I felt like I was just, okay, get the basic. You should have seen me my first day with my dad. He was just doing basic ball moves.
Yeah.
And I started crying. I was like, what am I doing? Like, who do you think you are? I felt like I couldn't even dribble. And now the things that I'm able to do, I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, oh, it's nice for something to feel kind of not easy, but familiar.
Yeah.
And yeah, shot last year, like you were saying, I was kind of our forward. And this year my mentality is if I have to be one of the forwards, I'm going to be a forward that can handle the ball and shoot on your face all day.
Did you have a 3 in your season with SAIT the first year?
No, only in practice.
Right. So I don't think I gave you for those that are listening, for SAIT to have the put it on the board call, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, and I had like the Foggo was like ready to go to like the top of like the Foggo.
Yeah.
And I was
Oh
like
man.
Jermaine and I
Okay,
were like,
okay,
and
motivation.
I got to do it because I did the intros for you guys that one time.
Yeah.
So I got it in the intro that one time. Like, I
Yeah.
finally get to like kill Richina's name for an
Okay,
intro
okay.
that I haven't been able to get for a tray.
Okay, perfect. So that's funny you said that. I was putting up some threes today.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. It's like it's not just the skill side of basketball is so underestimated. And if you have not grown up putting in those reps, you don't realize it's all up here, right? Like I can actually feel your body trying to connect the dots. You can feel when your brain can understand the move, but you're not quick enough. Like it's a process.
So we're excited for that. And then the final thing is, so I'm on the livery page one day and I'm looking for stuff. And then who do I see at the front of the page rocking stuff?
Well, just there I am. Me and my brother, actually.
And SportsCheck.
Yes, I know. It's funny how those things happen. I have Miko Bain. She had some years at SAIT.
Mm-hmm.
She now works for SportsCheck, and she was doing some photography stuff, and she is a camp photographer. They have the type of relationship where she just gets clothes and, and she asked me, are you and your brother able? So we went up to Drumheller and we spent the morning there and we did some cool stuff. And then from that, SportsCheck asked me to do a campaign. And I feel like it's one of those things you do one and then another.
So it's kind of growing. Like you never saw yourself kind of being in the model realm, right?
No. And I don't take it seriously. Like I kind of joke with myself, like, oh, there's me in the model. But it's not like that.
It's trippy when you know someone, right? It's like, oh, I think that's Richina. Oh, that is Richina. Damn. And then
even when I walk by SportsCheck, I'm like, oh, or people send me stuff. I'm like, oh, that's the pictures. So that part's cool.
It's definitely a trip. Is there any other stuff that's kind of in the bag, or everything just kind of focused on?
How do I explain it? It's like companies buy this stock of photos.
Okay.
So it's
like the stock photo type.
Yeah, exactly. So just that sort of stuff for different brands, but they're not specific brands. Like, so it's not like
you just like model in different side of things, and then they kind of just throw whatever, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's been awesome to have you on here, and like I said, it's been a privilege. I've gotten a chance to kind of see your career grow, where not everyone's had that opportunity. So I wanted to kind of get it out on an audio platform to have. Yeah, it is. It's crazy just how things kind of re-intersect. I didn't think in 2007 that I would be, all those years later at SAIT actually calling your games. It's trippy.
Well, definitely me neither.
Yeah,
it makes two of us, and. I mean, if I can, Josh, I would just like to really thank you. I feel like you've always, since in my SAIT career, you've definitely been someone in my corner, even if it's just small conversations before games.
Appreciate it.
I know you really take interest in like the music that I request before.
Yeah. Because the
it's
girls weren't getting it, man. The girls weren't getting it.
Some country bumpkin.
The same stuff. Bieber song, and then the edited stuff. We're changing that this year. Jermaine and I have making sure we're taking over.
You guys bring, like when I rewatch the games and hear you guys on the other side of it, like it doesn't go unnoticed, and it's so appreciated. And having that conversation of women's sport gaining some momentum, I feel like it's those little things that really.
Well, you watch the Final Four this year, and the NC2A women's game has been better than the men's for 5 years. It's the worst kept secret if you're in the world of basketball. The women's game for college basketball and the women's March Madness has been better than the men's March Madness easily. And if you watch some of these women's games that we've had, like and this is a women's team that some people would say in transition, right? There's not the Alicia Tans there and anymore, but she's there in the sidelines coaching you guys, giving you advice.
Advice, is that what you call it?
Yeah, I'm trying to be nice. But I still think what you guys saw last year, I thought it was really awesome, seeing what we saw from the women's soccer team, and nobody believed in them all year. Everyone was just like, oh, like all the seniors are gone, and they made it to the playoffs. And all year too, I think there were some people in that organization that were like, I don't know if that women's team's going to win any games. And down the stretch, like there was some real playoff momentum. Like there was a lot of close games. You look at some of those last 5 games for the women. You could go any other way and win all 5 of those games, just the way that they went. Some of them were unfortunate starts, some of them were fortunate endings, but you were in them all at the end. And I think it was a rally cry, and I think your leadership also dictated it. And it was a pleasure to be able to call and really root for. And I think some people said, like, you could hear, I try to take myself out of the bias interest because I know there's parents from both sides at home because I've been on this other side. I'm like, but I think for those last 5 games for you guys, and people are like, you can tell the rooting interest for SAIT now for the women in those games. Because I'm like, yeah, I wanted them to make the playoffs. The men have all these national championships. I want the women to have that provincial championship.
I mean, it does get to that point where you're not having like a traditionally successful season. You do start to celebrate the small momentum shifts. And I think when you, like, I don't know if you remember this game we played against Olds, and Olds like all season had just been killing us, and they still won by a substantial amount, but we had just started running this new play. It was executed perfectly.
They ran you guys off in the first, and I think it was like a 20-4 or something in the first. Jay and I looked at each other, like, oh man,
here we go. I know.
And then I think like the second half, it was just like a different team. And I think that's why there was that final 5 games. So like Jay and I always kind of have our reconnaissance in the parking lot afterwards and everything. We're like, man, if the girls play like that, the final 5 games, they can make the playoffs. Like they figured something out.
I know. And that's what I was saying to you about everyone needs to come in with the understanding that hustle. Like, let me tell you, Red Deer is the most, for example, annoying team to play just because they're so scrappy, intense. Same with Lethbridge, right? You know you're going to get a good game. You're never going to get an easy shot. Every time they box you out, they go for wind. Like, and if we can take that mentality, and that's the thing, I think what we struggle with first half with a younger group, a newer group, no one's willing to really like take to that next level, step out of their own comfort zone to do it. But I think Morgan Rolfe is an amazing example of that. The season she had from start to end, she was like a force. And you look at Morgan, you wouldn't think like,
there's a lot of growth in that team. And I could tell mentally sometimes, like Skylar, I had to talk with her one time, like she was missing a lot of threes and you could tell it was getting on her. So just keep on going, just keep on working. Don't let the pressure go, right?
And that's the difference about being an older athlete, is you just next. And you see that in the girls, body language changes. And that's what I was saying to you about the gratitude you go in with as an athlete, being able to get back into sport. It's like, okay, what's the challenge today? What's it going to bring me? And it really is mindset, right? And I know that it's not as simple as to just, it's okay, on to the next. That sounds a little cheesy, but it really is that.
It is. You kind of, like Ted Lasso says, you got to be a goldfish. You just got to be a goldfish. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you hopefully as we record today. In a month or so, kind of back grinding and hoping to add something to that wall for the women, because it's long overdue.
I know, 5th year.
Yeah.
This is it. So,
well, phenomenal athlete, phenomenal person. Awesome to have you on here, Richina, and look forward to calling your games in the season. And until next time, folks, cheers and enjoy the day.
Thanks, Josh.